Hi, my name is Liz Coulter. I write contemporary fantasy as L.D. Coulter and epic fantasy as L. Denny Coulter. Today, I'm going to be talking about why to write short stories, as well as how to make your work stand out from the crowd and submitting your work. I write science fiction and fantasy, so most of my examples are going to come from speculative fiction, but they pertain across fiction genres and to nonfiction short stories as well. I am going to open up a slideshow here. So in a minute, I should be minimizing way off to the side. And there we go. Okay, so first, before we get started, let's define what a short story is. I took this from writingsmarter.com. It aligns pretty well with the lengths that I'm familiar with. Different genres, different markets will have different parameters. In general, flash fiction, starting with that second one, is about 0 to 1,000 words. There is a subcategory called microfiction, and that is actually 100 words or less, sometimes called drabbles. And yes, there are markets for that. Short stories are inclusive, so 0 to 7,500 words. Again, different genres or markets have different lengths. Literary sometimes says 10,000 or 12,000 words is the cutoff for a short story. Novelettes start where short stories stop. I'm used to seeing them go up to 17,500 or sometimes 20,000. Novellas start where novelettes stop and go up to 40 or 50,000 words. After that, it's a novel. So that's what a short story is, but why bother? In the past, writers could have a career writing short stories. Magazines really hit about the early 19th century, I believe. Penny Dreadfuls and magazine writing was lucrative up through about the mid-1900s, and pulp writers who could make a career on short stories. These days, conventional wisdom says most careers are going to be built on novels. I still think writing short stories is very beneficial, and here are 10 reasons why. Techniques are going to be the same for writing longer fiction or writing short fiction. You need to decide the best point of view character or characters, the tense that you want to use, develop your plot, your arc, decide on tone. Are you writing humor or horror? It's a whole lot easier to experiment with those things at shorter lengths than in a 50,000 or 100,000 or 150,000 word novel. Use short fiction to practice your technique. Likewise, business skills are going to be similar in short fiction or novel writing. The path to publication is the same. You find markets, editors, publishers, you follow their formatting guidelines. If they like your work, you may get an R&R, a revise and resubmit, and then work with an editor. You might be using track changes. One really important point is that each story is going to come with a contract. I believe that I've written with my, published with my reprints, published probably close to 40 short stories. That's 40 different contracts. That's 40 different, mostly different editors that I've worked with. Occasionally, if something in a contract is non-standard, there's negotiation back and forth. If you publish a lot of shorter works, it's going to provide a wide range of experience with different editors. The more submissions you have out, better odds you have that something will get published. Additionally, with each new short story that you write, you've got that learning curve going on. You're getting feedback on what's working and what isn't, but your stories are getting better as you go, and that also will keep increasing your odds. No matter what speed you write at, and there are people who can knock out a novel in 2 months or less. Myself, I'm a very slow writer. If I get one novel a year out, I'm doing good. But no matter what speed you write at, I'm going to bet that you write short stories faster. I can do a flash story in 1 or 2 days. I can do a short story in 1 or 2 weeks, depending on what else I have going on and how much refining I do. More stories out there equals better odds. So there's this kind of exposure, right? And as writers, getting your work out there in front of strangers can definitely feel like that. But that's not the kind of exposure that I'm talking about right now. People will tell you that short stories aren't going to help your career, but I disagree. There are no guarantees, but I believe that it can. If you start achieving multiple publications, your name starts getting out there, you start getting noticed by editors, you can end up being invited to invitation-only anthologies, you can end up in year's best anthologies, you can sell to foreign markets. It opens up a lot of doors. Likewise, stories that get noticed, stories that are popular, stories that are getting good critical reviews might end up nominated for awards. And there are a lot of awards out there. Even if you aren't nominated for an award, a lot of review magazines cover many short story venues, and you can end up with a good review, and that's your blurb to use from then on. If you do end up being nominated for an award or winning an award, that's a lot more fans, editors, agents that are going to see your name. A very unexpected bonus of being a short story writer was my author presence and a little street cred because of author rankings. This is my Amazon author rank, and I screenshotted this. This is the period between February 2014 and August 2017. My first novel came out around December of 2016, so that would be somewhere in here. These two #1 spikes were not novel driven. These were from anthologies that I had a story in, and the editor was promoting the anthology, or they put it on sale, or for whatever reason it sold a lot. The anthology went to #1. Every writer in the anthology went to #1 with it. Does that help your career? I don't know, but it doesn't hurt. Amazon users can see, I don't know if they don't directly see this kind of author rank, but they can see when your things are going up and down. And likewise, Goodreads. Sorry about the motorcycle outside. Thank you so much, guys. Have to have the window open because it's really hot in here. Okay, so Goodreads. When my first novel released over here, I already had 162 ratings on Goodreads and 49 reviews. I had an average rating of 4.39 as an author. As a tip along these lines, you might want to watch how an anthology or a magazine that you're in is doing before you rush out and claim it on Amazon, which is a part of your process of linking to that and linking your author rank. You might want to watch and just see how the reviews and how the sales are going before you grab it, since you will be tied to it. Number 5, big ideas versus little ideas. Ideas are not always going to be big enough to warrant a novel. Don't toss those little ideas out. As authors, we're probably constantly getting those little things that resonate with us, an image, a story title idea, whatever. Throw those into an idea file. I'm a big believer in idea files. Then when you get stuck on your novel, when you just want to take a break, when you just feel like writing a short story, go to that idea file and get those little ideas. Writing short fiction will help you to learn to write tighter. As novelists, you have all this room to ramble around, but it doesn't mean that you should. We've probably all read novels that did too much rambling, or the sentences were just wordy. If you have a 1,208 word short story and you decide you want to cut it down to 1,000 words so that you can submit it to flash fiction only markets, that forces you to comb through that story, find the extraneous words, find where you were being too wordy, and cut those out to get that length down. Short story writing in general, even writing to 5,000 words, writing to 10,000 words, every word counts, and it teaches you to write tighter. All right, here's one that no writer enjoys and all of us deal with. Writing and submitting are a grueling process. There's the stress of waiting on a response is grueling. You have high odds of rejection, but dealing with rejection is essential to being a writer. It's part and parcel of the process. I'm not going to tell you that getting a short story rejected doesn't hurt, but I do think it's easier to take when you get a rejection for that 1,000-word story or that 5,000-word story that you spent a few days to a couple of weeks on, rather than your 100,000-word novel that you spent a year on. Regardless of the quality of your writing, if you're writing more and you're submitting more, it's inevitable that you're going to get rejected more. Don't let that stop you. Keep submitting. If you send your short story out to 3 different markets and they all reject it, don't stop there. Don't self-reject. Send it out everywhere that you can. My most often rejected short story was rejected 22 times and then sold to a pro magazine at what were then the pro rates of 8 cents a word. So keep submitting. And it's also easier, keep writing, keep getting more short stories out there, because if you have a dozen short stories circulating and you get a rejection on one, you turn around, you send it out to a different market. But meanwhile, you might be being shortlisted at a different market, passed up to the editor. Some might be getting accepted. You might be in the contract stage with another one. The more stories you have out there, the easier the rejection gets. And meanwhile, it's giving you a thicker skin for when you start getting your novels out there. So I very intentionally chose this slide for income of $1 bills rather than a bank vault or a stacks of $100 bills or whatever. Most people are not going to make a living, as I talked about, writing short stories these days, but it can bring in income and it can add up. There are more science fiction and fantasy markets right now than there ever have been. Pro rates at this time begin at 8 cents a word. That means that if you write a 5,000 word short story, and I keep bringing up that 5,000 number, that's actually a very good word count to shoot for. 5,000 or under is, especially in speculative fiction, going to give you the most markets that you can submit to. So let's say that you sell a 5,000 words short story at pro rates. That's $400. That's money toward cover art if you self-publish your novels. That's registration to an in-person convention when we get back to those. Literary can be an exception to this. There are a lot of non-paying markets in literary, but when it does pay, it can pay really big. The New Yorker and the Atlantic don't advertise their rates, but I've heard $2,000 to $7,000 for a short story. In science fiction and fantasy, Tor.com is our New Yorker, 25 cents a word. And then there are contests, and contests will often offer very good monetary prizes. I'm going to talk about contests and fee-based markets a little bit later on, but Writers of the Future has no fee to enter. They have quarterly winners, first, second, and third place, that pay out $1,000, $750, and $500 respectively. And then at the end of the year, a grand prize winner is chosen who gets an additional $5,000. Some other contests I've entered, Omnidon has one prize of $3,000 once a year. A couple of years or more, 5 years ago or more, I entered something called X Prize. They had a $10,000 winners package. A couple of years ago, IO9 ran the Economic Security Project contest. The grand prize was $12,000. It's not going to be common. There are very few winners, but there is money out there to be made on short fiction. Even more than that, again, most stories aren't going to do this, but it is out there. Small stories can definitely do big things. This is the cover for the collection by Ted Chiang of some of his short stories. It's titled Short Stories of Your Life, Stories of Your Life and Others. The lead story in this is Stories of Your Life. You may know that one better as the movie Arrival. Brokeback Mountain began as a short story. We all know where that went. This guy, everything Stephen King has written practically has ended up on film, including some of his short stories. The Fly, I think it was written in the 50s, possibly the 40s. 5 different movies. Fortunately, they stopped at The Fly 2 so far. And the all-time winner that I found was Zorro. These short stories, 23 movies and counting. So small stories can do big things. My 10th reason for writing short stories, I think, is one of the most important. Completion satisfaction. Most people, or many people at least, take months to years to finish a novel. Some never finish their novel. Short stories give us a sense of completion, and it gives you that positive feedback loop. You finish something, you get it out there, you get enough stuff out there, you start getting accepted. And I think as writers, we really need that for motivation. So don't let short story writing derail you from writing your novel. Don't let it become a procrastination. But writing short stories can often be worked in alongside other projects. It can give you the mental break you sometimes need when novel writing is getting stale, and it's a great tool for improving your writing skills overall. All right, so now you are sold on writing short stories. How to get started? Well, like I've said already, writing short stories is just like writing anything, only shorter than writing a novel. You have less room to impress. You need to think smaller. You're usually going to have one character arc versus multiple character arcs. And a lot of my short stories have just started with a single image. Your ideas are going to be smaller. This is where you go to your idea file for those little things that you know can't pan out to a bigger story. You need to really work to stand out from the crowd, though. Like I said, there are more science fiction and fantasy markets right now than there have ever been. But that also means that there are more writers. There are more people out there submitting. You need to stand out to those slushers. How? Well, here are a few thoughts on that. C.C. Finlay is the editor-in-chief of the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. He's been quoted as saying, stories are like airplanes. They will usually crash on takeoff or landing. What that means is make certain that your opening is as strong as you can get it. Make sure that you nail that landing. Don't write a good story and rush the ending. Don't go to the cliche of they woke up. Don't ramble at the beginning. And I'm going to talk more about starting in the right place here. Like a novel, you need to anchor your reader with who, what, when, and where early in the story. If you format to normal formatting, the William Shun manuscript type guidelines, your first page will have 16 lines. That first page is often the only shot you get at grabbing a slusher or an editor and getting them to read on. We start with the inciting incident when we write, right? That's starting in the right place. Start with your inciting incident where everything changes for your character. You're, like I said, going to anchor your reader in who, what, when, and where. You're going to at least give an inkling of the stakes and the problem that your reader is facing. You need to know down to a sentence what your story is about, and you need to drop hints of that right at the very beginning. I'm going to give a personal example here. I have a short story that I completed fairly recently, my most recent story that I wrote. I was feeling good about the story. It seemed to accomplish what I set out to accomplish. It had emotion, it had action, it had all the elements that I wanted in there. And a friend of mine offered to read the first couple of pages. He is an assistant editor at 2 major pro magazines. He has written for a review magazine, or worked with a review magazine. He has been a slush reader for a long time. I could not have done better. I was so excited to send this to him. He promised to read the first couple of pages, but said, go ahead and send the whole file. So I'm thinking, this is one of the best stories I've written in my heart. That's how I felt about it. I send it off to him thinking, yeah, here comes the motorcycle again. He's going to get hooked and read the whole thing. I got his feedback, And it was that he had started to fizzle at the end of page 1 and stopped reading early in page 2. So I went back and I took a look at this story that I had been so happy with. And of course, he was absolutely right. My story started on page 3. I had started with the inciting incident. I had started where everything changed for my character, where things were very emotional. I'd written in the emotions, but when I looked at it critically, I had started with feelings. I had started with her thinking to herself. I had set the scene. I had done the who, what, when, and where, but I hadn't dropped any hints of what the story was actually about, what her real crisis was. So went to page 3, pulled out the elements of that, and put it right in those first 16 lines. Not the whole story, of course, but just the seeds, enough to hook a slush reader into going, ooh, that's what her problem is. That's what the stakes are. All right, enough on that. Be original. I can't stress that enough. Originality is huge. I did slush reading myself. I slushed for a couple of years for a magazine. I've also been a judge 2 or 3 years running for a conference, a writers' conference for their novel contest, and we read the openings of novels. When you're reading opening after opening after opening, they all start to run together and you start seeing very common things. Really work to think outside the box. Don't go for cliches or tropes. Be as original as you can. Vivid detail. For me, that's a huge thing for me as a reader. And by detail, I absolutely do not mean backstory. I don't mean world building. I mean sharp, vivid details that are going to bring your characters and your stories to life. A few words here and there, a metaphor stuck in that makes your reader feel, that evokes emotion, that makes them relate to something. Those are really important. And finally, getting feedback. As I just talked about with my own example, feedback is huge. We know how we want our stories to come across to the reader. We know what we want them to say, but without a sounding board, you just don't know if you're succeeding. If possible, try and get feedback from people further along the publishing road than yourself. But at the least, get writers. Don't rely on friends and family, people who are going to tell you what you want to hear. Get writers who can evaluate the technical aspects of a story, because your story is going to have to get past an editor before it can ever get to readers like your friends and family. Finally, get people who are supportive, people who genuinely want you to succeed. Same guy. Whether their feedback is tough or not, and hopefully it is, because that's honestly going to be the best feedback for you. Make sure that it's people who care about seeing you succeed. Okay, so now you know that you want to write short stories. You have written your short story, and now what are you going to do with it? First of all, hopefully, as writers, you are reading a lot. You should be reading short fiction. You should be seeing what's out there, finding out what works, seeing what editors' tastes are like. And if you find a magazine or an anthology editor where you really like the stories they pick, submit where you read. It's a great place to start. You can, of course, just go online, do searches by genre. A lot of things will pop up. Personally, I recommend using a submission tracker. I use one. I use the submission grinder. I used to use Duotrope, and Rallin.com has been out there for a long, long time. All of these, and probably many more out there, but these are 3 that I'm familiar with, they do more than just track your submissions, keep track of when you submitted, how long it's been out, what the average response times are. They also have search engines, their databases. You can plug in the length of your story, the genre of your story, the subgenre, a few other parameters that you want, like how much you want to get paid, and it'll come up with a list of suggestions for you. So I do recommend using those. All right, now you've picked your markets. You've got a list of them. You know where you want it to go first. If it is a pro market, a known editor, something that's been around for a while, we're all familiar with those. We know that they're reputable markets. If it's places that you know less about, if it's contests, if it requires a fee, make sure that you're doing your due diligence. Look those markets up. If there has been controversy on a market, it's probably going to pop up pretty easily. If nothing else, it'll pop up in Twitter threads. Now, those may be biased. They may be one person's opinion. But if there have been problems with a market, you're probably going to see more than one thing. Writer Beware is a really good resource. Writer Beware is run by Victoria Strauss. It's sponsored by the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America, the Mystery Writers of America, the Horror Writers Association, and the American Society of Journalists and Authors. If a complaint comes in about a magazine, an editor, whatever, they research it and they write it up. So good place to go. You can just plug in Writer Beware and find it. That's the name of the site. Problems with markets vary from unprofessionalism that's pretty innocent to downright predatory practices. Or you might just turn up that the editor has been very publicly outspoken on topics that you feel exactly the opposite about, and you just make a decision that you don't want to be associated with that particular market. Whatever, do your due diligence and on any markets that you don't know. All right, now you've found the markets that you do want to submit to. Make sure to read the guidelines. It's so simple. Oh, I've gone on to read the guidelines and I forgot to circle back to contests. I'm sorry, I said that I was going to do that. If they are requiring fees, as I said, it might be very innocent. It might be a perfectly good market to submit to. Some of the contests that I said I had submitted to, one of them anyway, I paid to submit to. I think I've only paid once, maybe twice. It ought to be a big red flag. In general, money should be going to the author, but just because they charge a fee doesn't automatically mean that they're a bad market. All right, so in the guidelines, you'll find out if they charge a fee or not. So take a look at the guidelines. Sometimes they're a couple of pages long and people skim and send in things that are not per the formatting guidelines. it can only help your chances of success to follow their guidelines, whatever they are, even if it's non-standard, like they want single spacing. For me, I don't mind going back, reformatting. It's a matter of moments. Format it to single spacing and submit what they want. I mentioned that I was a judge for a writers' convention, and it used to break my heart because as a judge, we had to grade them on their formatting, and there were very specific formatting guidelines, and for everything that they didn't do, 1 point off, 1 point off, 1 point off. And I'd read the story, and the story was excellent, and it would kill me to take those points off, knowing that that might mean the difference between them making the finals or not, or as a finalist, winning or not. Yep, say, oh, 2 guys, great. Okay, submit top down. That means don't self-reject. When you submit your stories, keep submitting them. Keep them going, obviously not to the same market. Keep finding new markets to submit them to. Remember my story that went out 22 times before it found a pro home. But there's no reason to start down the line. Submit from the top, the best markets, the best paying, the best known, the most readers. As long as what you've written is what they have asked for in their guidelines, start at the top. So in conclusion, I hope that I've been able to give you 10 convincing reasons to try short story writing, to give you some ideas on how to get started, and more than getting started, I hope that I've inspired you to take risks, to not only start a story, to finish your story, to submit it, and to keep submitting it. I wish you all the very best of luck. My last slide here, if you would like to know any more about me, my writing, my website, and my newsletter are listed for you there. Thank you.